In the months following the global collapse caused by the pandemic, the promised recovery never truly arrived. Markets started moving again, governments announced trillion-dollar stimulus packages, and newspapers printed optimistic headlines. But in real life, the cost of living skyrocketed, wages stagnated, and the grocery cart seemed to shrink each week. In just a few years, what was once considered normal, buying meat, paying rent without struggle, saving for emergencies, became a privilege. Explanations range from supply chain disruptions to excessive money in circulation and wars in strategic regions. However, behind the official justifications, traces of something deeper, more calculated, began to emerge. While the average citizen adapted to a new economic reality, global institutions increased their presence behind the scenes. Central banks, investors with trillion-dollar portfolios, and almost invisible organizations were making decisions with devastating impacts. Few noticed that the gears of a new system were moving beneath the noise of inflation and high interest rates. Welcome to another night, where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. The pandemic brought a global collapse that, for many, seemed unpredictable. But as economies began to rebuild, something stood out. The crisis didn't end. It merely changed shape. In official speeches, it was called a transitional phase. In practice, the world entered a spiral of rising prices, soaring interest rates, and a constant loss of purchasing power. And it didn't matter the country, the United States, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Germany, all seemed to suffer from the same affliction. The dominant explanation? Inflation was a natural consequence of stimulus packages and broken supply chains. But there were signs that this narrative was just the surface of something much deeper. What few realized was that inflation didn't hit everyone the same way. Large corporations maintained or even increased their profits, while ordinary families had to choose between paying rent or buying food. The logic suggested that everyone was in the same boat, but the numbers told a different story. The financial elite seemed immune. This raised a point most preferred to avoid. What if this scenario wasn't a consequence, but part of a deliberate project? Let's look at the data. In the United States alone, the consumer price index reached over 9% in 2022, the highest since 1981. In Europe, the UK faced an energy crisis that turned home heating into a luxury for many. Yet instead of implementing policies to ease the burden on the population, central banks responded in the harshest way possible, by raising interest rates. According to many independent economists, this decision not only failed to solve the problem, but made it worse. But why would anyone deliberately choose a strategy that impoverishes the majority? The monetary tightening promoted by the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank had a direct consequence. Access to credit was restricted. Small businesses closed. Home financing became unfeasible. And the lower and middle classes watched their dreams melt away. Meanwhile, funds like BlackRock seized the moment to acquire devalued assets, real estate, bankrupt companies, land, on an unprecedented scale. What looked like a market move was, in fact, a silent transfer of power and property. This logic of concentration was cleverly disguised by technical language. They spoke of monetary stability, fiscal adjustment, inflation control. Words that sound trustworthy, but in practice hide political decisions with direct impacts on those who have less. When the state injects trillions into the economy and then suddenly pulls it out through exorbitant interest rates, what you see is a destructive cycle. First, consumption and credit are fueled, then the rug is pulled out. Who survives that fall? There is also the element of silence. Traditional media covered the rise in inflation, but avoided discussing the structural causes. Experts who pointed out dangerous connections between central banks, trillion-dollar funds, and institutions like the BIS were ignored. The debate was limited to superficial causes. But how do you explain the fact that amid a global crisis, wealth concentration reached historic records? And more, why, instead of proposing reforms to ease the pressure on the most vulnerable, did governments align themselves with policies that seemed tailor-made to protect the top of the pyramid? The measures weren't mistakes. They were decisions, and decisions have those responsible. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens were conditioned to accept sacrifice. reduce consumption, work more for less, cut essential expenses. But the question of whether the system itself was working against them was never raised. What if, instead of failing, it was functioning exactly as designed? The economy was treated as a technical, neutral, untouchable field. But behind the metrics, there are choices. And when those choices always lead to the same outcome, wealth concentration and the weakening of the middle class, maybe it's time to ask whether we are dealing with an architecture carefully designed to produce that result. With inflation eroding stability and interest rates crushing any real chance of recovery, the world began to get used to crisis as a permanent state. But this didn't happen by accident. It required planning, omission, and perhaps something even more disturbing, collusion. What if this crisis is more than just the side effect of poorly calculated decisions? What if it has been, from the beginning, the perfect tool to shape a new model of society? The more one investigates this crisis, the clearer it becomes that it wasn't just the consequence of a pandemic. It was built, and those who built it are not in the headlines. When I started diving into the backstage of the global financial system, one institution in particular caught my attention. Few people know it, but the Bank for International Settlements, the famous BIS, sits at the center of this mechanism. It's described as a bank for central banks. But what does that really mean? It means that decisions about monetary policy, like interest rates, credit, and money circulation, are discussed in closed meetings, far from the public and even the press. The BIS operates almost invisibly. It has no accountability, faces no elections, and yet it directly influences the lives of billions of people. This is where the leaders of the world's major central banks regularly meet to decide the direction of the global economy. Does that sound normal to you? Now here's something curious. In recent years, central banks from various countries started acting in sync. In 2022, nearly all of them raised interest rates at the same time, using the same message: fight inflation. But if each country has a different reality, why identical responses? It doesn't look like coincidence. It looks like strategy. Coordinated by whom, exactly? That's when I followed a trail that always led to the same name, BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, with over $10 trillion under management. You might think it just invests, but BlackRock's role goes far beyond that. It has direct access to the backrooms. It advises central banks. It participates in public policy decisions. And at the same time, it profits from the impacts of those same policies. Can you imagine the scale of control? During the pandemic, the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, hired BlackRock to help buy assets and stabilize the economy. Now think with me. The same company that advises on what to buy also sells the assets being acquired. It's like someone having the answer key to the test, and also writing the questions. Is that a free market or manipulation wrapped in suits and ties? And that influence doesn't stop there. BlackRock holds shares in the largest companies on the planet: energy, technology, pharmaceuticals, food. If you eat, get informed, move around, or pay a bill, there's probably a slice of BlackRock involved in it. It doesn't need to directly control governments. It just needs to control those who financially sustain them. All of this happens under the guise of technical neutrality. We're here to ensure economic stability, they say. But look around. What we see is the population losing income, debt exploding, and a handful of groups expanding their dominance. If this stability only works for the powerful, then who is it really designed for? When I started connecting the dots between the BIS, central banks, and BlackRock, it became clear that we're not just facing a dysfunctional system. We're looking at a structure designed to keep control in the hands of a few. It's a cycle. They create the crisis, offer the solution, and in the process, expand their dominance. All of it with technical language and a facade of legitimacy. And there's more. In global conferences, these same names began using terms like economic reset, digital transition, and programmable currency. They're already planning what comes after the crisis. Except this after no longer includes autonomy or sovereignty. It includes total control. If you think you know what power is, you might need to get to know BlackRock. We're not talking about just any company. We're talking about the largest asset manager in the world, with over $10 trillion under management. That's more than the GDP of entire countries. But what really matters isn't the size of the money. It's where it is. and more importantly, how it's used. BlackRock doesn't just invest. It shapes markets. It holds significant stakes in virtually every major global corporation, from tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Google to the biggest energy companies, banks, pharmaceutical firms, and retail chains. In other words, it has seats on boards, a voice in strategic decisions, and influence over the direction of the global economy. How can a company that isn't a government, isn't elected, and has no public accountability have this level of reach? And this influence isn't limited to the private sector. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, the Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage the purchase of bonds and financial assets with public money. But here's the point. It wasn't just advising on what to buy. It also owned many of the assets being purchased. A massive conflict of interest, but treated as normal. How can something like this go unnoticed? That's when it became clear BlackRock isn't just inside the system. It is part of the system, an invisible arm connecting the interests of central banks, major corporations, and global policies that were never voted on but directly affect everyone's lives. When it moves, markets react. When it speaks, governments listen. Who else can do that besides sovereign states? There's also a quieter, but even more powerful, element: BlackRock's algorithms. That's right. It developed systems like Aladdin, which analyzes financial risk and guides investment decisions in real time. Over $20 trillion circulates globally under the influence of this tool. We're talking about artificial intelligence shaping the global market without any external regulation. The technology that dictates where global capital flows is in the hands of a single company. And this level of silent control does something even more dangerous. It normalizes dominance. People get used to BlackRock being in the background, as if it were just another efficient company. But it's not just efficient. It's everywhere, and almost no one notices. This isn't just influence. It's power that has gone beyond being hidden. Now it's omnipresent. Furthermore, BlackRock maintains close ties with global institutions like the World Economic Forum, the IMF, and even the UN. It takes part in summits, discusses strategies on green economy, climate change, and the digitalization of finance. But have you ever stopped to think who chose these representatives? Who authorized them to decide what's best for the entire planet? Many of the projects currently underway, like central bank digital currencies, programmable control of transactions, and the redefinition of private property, were promoted and structured with direct support from BlackRock. It doesn't just anticipate the future, it helps design it. And the most dangerous part is that this future seems increasingly centralized, automated, and out of reach from public decision-making. And when the same entity controls companies in food, health, energy, transportation, and information, the question remains, is there any aspect of your life that isn't, in some way, under BlackRock's radar? What began as an investment manager has now become something much bigger. A silent gear operating above nations, above political systems, dictating the rules of a game that no one outside its circle can change. And the most unsettling part, almost no one talks about it, as if it were normal for a single organization to have access to every corner of the modern world. But now that you know, does it still seem normal? Have you heard about central bank digital currencies? The so-called CBDCs? They're being promoted as a revolution in the financial system. Faster, safer, more modern. But there's something they're not telling you. And I need to show you. Because in practice, this means handing over your money, what you earn through your hard work, to a system that can decide how, where, and even when you can use it. Sounds exaggerated? Just wait. China is already running tests with the digital yuan. Brazil announced the Drex. Europe, the United States, all moving in the same direction. But there's a massive difference between this and the money you use today. Physical cash, that paper in your wallet, is yours. You can give it, keep it, spend it however and with whomever you want. With a digital currency controlled by a central bank, not anymore. These currencies are programmable. That means they can be adjusted, blocked, or even expire after a certain date. It might sound like a technical detail, but that's exactly where the control lies. The central bank gains total power over every transaction you make. Everything recorded, everything monitored, everything traceable. How far could this go? Imagine a scenario where, if you consume more meat than what's considered environmentally ideal, your credits are limited. Or if you're part of a protest group, your access to the financial system is temporarily suspended for security reasons. Sound dystopian? It's already being tested. And this is not theory. They sell it with a pretty speech, fighting money laundering, increasing financial inclusion, digitizing the economy. But no one talks about what will be lost. Your privacy, your autonomy, the freedom to simply exist off the grid. And if you think this is still far off, think again. The structures are already being built. And guess who's helping construct them? The same institutions that profit from crises and control global financial flows. BIS, IMF, major banks, all involved. Coincidence? With CBDCs, money is no longer yours. It becomes a temporary permission, something you can use, as long as you're in compliance with the rules. And who decides those rules? Exactly. Not you. Not even your country in many cases. It's a system above that. You won't notice at first. It'll seem practical, convenient. But one day, you'll want to buy something, and the system will say no. And in that moment, you'll understand that the money no longer belongs to you. You belong to the money. And the strangest part, almost no one is talking about it, as if it were all normal, as if we weren't on the verge of losing the last remnant of financial freedom we still have. Now this is control, only this time disguised as innovation. The crisis came, and as always, they said it was for everyone. But who really broke? Who lost their home? Who saw their grocery cart shrink? It wasn't those with fortunes stashed in offshore accounts. It was the middle class, the ones who sustain the economy, who work, pay taxes, run businesses. They took the hardest hit, and it wasn't by accident. The narrative was one of sacrifice, that everyone had to do their part. But strangely, the burden always fell on the same shoulders. Sky-high interest rates, inflation eating away at wages, credit disappearing. And when the rope tightened, who do you think endured it? The powerful? No. They had reserves, access to special interest rates, information before anyone else. And the middle class? Left to bleed. Small business owners were the first to feel it. Credit cut off, demand plummeting, rent soaring. Meanwhile, large chains, backed by billion-dollar funds, swallowed up the competition. Does that look like fair competition? Or does it seem like the game was rigged for only one side to win? The middle class lost more than money. It lost stability, freedom of choice, the right to make mistakes. Because now, making one mistake means bankruptcy. And the cruelest part, they're still blamed for their own downfall. Spent too much, didn't plan properly, should have saved. How do you save when everything goes up, except your salary? Little by little, dependence set in. The one who had a car sells it. The one who rented moves back in with their parents. The one who owned a business now survives on side gigs. And every step down is another push toward becoming a hostage of the state or of the financial system. Because someone who's lost everything will accept any condition just to survive. Now look at the pattern. While millions were sinking, the big funds were shopping. BlackRock and other giants acquiring real estate, failed startups, bankrupt businesses. The excuse was simple: market opportunity. But what looks like a good investment is actually the direct result of an architecture designed for this. They knew what was coming, and they were ready. This siege wasn't done with tanks, it was done with rates. No bullets, just bills. And it's silent because it seems normal. It looks like a consequence, but it's not. When all roads lead to dependence, to loss of autonomy, to the centralization of everything, that's not failure. That's a plan. Gradually, the middle class is becoming an endangered species. That space between comfort and despair, where people once had some control over their own fate. And when that disappears, who decides where you go? Someone does. But it's not you. Perhaps the most perverse part of all this is the silence. Because the collapse of the middle class doesn't make headlines. There are no protests, no scandals. It's a slow, quiet disappearance, but devastating. And when it vanishes completely, who will be left between the top and the bottom? Who will keep the balance? Without a middle class, the world becomes a battlefield split between those who have everything and those who have nothing. We've seen how the crisis was built, how the architects acted behind the scenes, and how the middle class was cornered until it lost its breath. But the question that begins to press now is, where is all this leading? Because what once looked like a series of isolated economic measures is gradually taking the shape of a new model of the world. A model where money is no longer just a tool, it becomes a leash. And this model is already under construction. It rests on three pillars: total financial surveillance, property concentration, and digital dependence. The idea is simple. When you control currency, credit, and access to the most basic goods, you don't need weapons. Control comes by inertia. It comes by necessity. And when necessity tightens, anyone gives in. You might not see this clearly in your daily life yet, but you're already feeling it. Credit has disappeared. The cost of living has skyrocketed. The requirements to access services have increased. Apps demand constant verification. Purchases require two-step authentication. And this is just the beginning. Digitalization isn't just about convenience. It's about traceability. Now combine that with programmable digital currencies. The money you receive may have a predetermined destination. It can be blocked. It can be conditional. And what if tomorrow they require social verification to release your payment? What if your posts are reviewed before you're allowed to make financial transactions? It sounds like fiction until it isn't. This new system doesn't need enforcers. It's automated. It watches, cross-references data, identifies patterns. It knows if you traveled, bought too much meat, or missed a bill. And worse, it can act. It can limit, suspend, penalize, all without a single human warning. And how do you question an algorithm? This is where currency becomes a muzzle. Because unlike traditional censorship that forbids what you say, this one prevents you from living outside the script. You may still speak, but you won't be able to buy. You won't be able to move. You won't be able to escape the bubble the system created for you. And who controls this? It's not your local government. It's not the bank down your street. It's a global consortium of interests. BlackRock, BIS, international forums. They decide what's acceptable. They write the rules of what's to come. And you didn't even know there was a vote. But the most dangerous part isn't what has already been done. It's what's still coming. Because once everything is digital, programmable, and centralized, the next step is to turn the citizen into just another variable in the system. And at that point, you will no longer matters. What matters is what the code allows. This isn't just a new financial system. It's a new behavioral system, one that uses money as a fence and silence as the price. And it all starts out looking useful, practical, safe, until the day you try to step out and realize the doors are already locked. Everything revealed here is not the product of disconnected theories. It's a chain of facts, decisions, and strategies that, when placed side by side, unveil a scenario far broader than any ordinary economic crisis. Inflation, interest rates, the digitalization of money, the elimination of the middle class, all point to a new kind of financial order. One where power no longer lies in ballots, but in codes, in networks, and in the invisible algorithms that already control the system. This story is just one piece, and someday, maybe you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it, because more voices mean more discoveries.